One of the points that the speakers have consistently made, and I expect our speaker tonight will make the same one, is that ethics matters even after you get your final grade in your core ethics course. And I think we could not have done better than our speaker tonight. Colonel John A. Toolan, USMC, is the director of the Command and Staff College at Quantico. He has served in the Marine Corps for 28 years. He served in the 1st Marine Division, at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego, at Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, Headquarters Marine Corps, no doubt as punishment for his sins, getting a headquarters tour. And he has been a military officer instructor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he's served with the 3rd Marine Division. More importantly, to our purposes, I think, he has served in combat during Operation Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's a proud native of Brooklyn, a proud graduate of Xavier High School and Fordham University, and also the proud parent of 3 children, one of whom is 2nd Lieutenant Sean Toolan, USMC, U.S. Naval Academy, class of 2005. I'm told by my Marine Corps friends that in Iraq, Colonel Toolan had many dimensions of his reputation, and one is that whenever any of his Marines under his command were in a firefight, he somehow managed to show up. And that he showed up without ever micromanaging the subordinate officers in command. And he showed up to be with his Marines when they were engaged on the line. And I think that that makes important points to all of us here. In fact, I'm told that the Marines under his command thought maybe he had been cloned because he seemed to show up at several firefights going on simultaneously. The superintendent always reminds us that here at the Naval Academy, we are in the business of producing combat leaders of character. And that is why we chose Colonel John A. Toolan as our speaker tonight. He is a Brigadier General Select, and I, as the son of a career Marine, know that in the Marine Corps you refer to a Brigadier General Select as Colonel. So please join me in a warm Naval Academy welcome to Colonel John A. Toolan.
First of all, I'd like you to know that I wasn't sweating, getting nervous about this talk. The waiter unfortunately dropped a pitcher of water on my jacket, so that's why I'm wet in the back. But then that's part of my Marine Corps heritage, being amphibious. So I'd also like to say that one of the reasons why I was out among my troops was that my staff told me to get out of there. So I paid attention to my staff because they really did most of the work. First of all, I'm honored, actually, to be here in this group. The fact is that there's several Naval Academy graduates who served with me, that guys like Ronnie Winchester and J.P. Blacksmith and others who, and Ben Watson and a few other guys who are just tremendous combat leaders. And so there is no question in my mind that this institution provides some of the finest leaders that I know, at least the Marine Corps has today. So with a great deal of pride and a little bit of humility, I come here before you tonight. I thought this was interesting in the Trident talk today. I picked it up in the hall, and it said, they asked some students some questions. It said, if you were to invite someone to speak at a conference or lecture series at the Academy, who would you invite and why? It was interesting. One of the midshipmen said that he would invite George Clooney because he's a cool guy. And another guy said he would invite some famous pro athletes so they could tell stories of their social life. However, the one non-Navy Air Force cadet said, someone who's been a commander on the ground in Iraq or Afghanistan. Unfortunately, he's not here, but there is another fine Air Force cadet who I think you're recognizing tonight, so I'm going to speak based on that recommendation. I think I'd like to make, in my talk, two points. First of all, I believe it's the leader's responsibility to provide the understanding, the level of understanding that's required for your sailors, your Marines, your soldiers, when they are put in an environment that's going to be very complex, like Iraq. It's the leader's responsibility to image them through what they should expect and how they should handle situations. And there's a lot of ways to do it, and hopefully I'll give you a few examples. Secondly, the other point, I believe, is that none of us here are properly prepared to handle the complexity of the environments where a lot of angry young men exist. We are sometimes, I think, fighting with one arm tied behind our back. And so it's a challenge, but it's not insurmountable, and I'd like to talk about that as well. Part of it is I got the opportunity to read some of the Academy papers, and I was very impressed. One was the sanctions against Iraq, which I know was one of the award winners. Excellent paper. The deception of reporters and the fact that, it's acceptable, and on occasion you can even lie to them. And nuclear weapons are justified to be held by North Korea. What I found interesting about those things is that even though we may argue whether it's right or wrong that sanctions were bad or North Korea should have nuclear weapons, what I saw the students doing was looking at it from a perspective not as a Westerner, but as a neutral person, using some of the philosophies and theories of Kant and others to try and see things through other people's eyes. And I thought that was incredible. And that's the kind of learning that our students here in the Naval Academy need to keep doing. And I challenge the students to maintain that level of thinking, because you're going to get involved in some tactical level operations, and sometimes you're going to think it's too ethereal. But the reality is that it's critically important. I think that one of the things that we do for our young soldiers, sailors, and Marines is in our basic training we establish a foundation, and the Admiral talked about that earlier. In the Marine Corps, which I know best, in boot camp, our young Marines are led through a 73-week curriculum. And it's really all about preparing them for the complexity of the world they're going to face. We do that by highlighting three of our core values of honor, courage, and commitment. And sometimes I talk to educators, or I used to when I was at MCRD, talk to educators, they would be amazed. They'd say, how did you get little Johnny to stand at attention for more than 20 minutes? Because he never showed up for class and I could never find him when he was at high school. And I explained to the educators that really what we do is we take these young men and women and we put them on a journey. And the reality is they have a lot of those values inside. It's part of their makeup. But what they need is some type of crucible event. Boot camp provides that. Combat provides that. And when we get through that boot camp experience, I usually bring the drill instructors in and I say, see these drill instructors? They're a lot like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. They tell them to line up on the yellow footprints, yellow brick road, and then they take them on this journey. And at the end, when they pull the curtain back, there's nobody special there. But when they graduate, they say, hey, I had the guts, I had the courage. I understand these values. I'm a United States Marine. And when you raise the importance of those values to them at boot camp, it makes a big difference when you put them on the street in Iraq. I think that it's also important as a leader, again, as I said, to image your folks through the environment they're going to face, to have stories. And this is maybe, I offer this as a couple of tools for you leaders who are going to be dealing with this. When you sit and you talk to these young folks, they like to have a story. Storytelling is very important. I have a couple. Bear with me. But, Back in the 1930s, and I tell my Marines this story. I in fact told this story to my guys when we crossed the border from Kuwait into Iraq in March of '03. Got them in a tent and said, all right guys, we're going. Now I just want to tell you a story. And I tell them about this person, this individual, his name was Fast Eddie, early 1930s. He was a consigliere for Al Capone. And he also had a son, and his son was about 14 years old. And he got to a point in his life where he said, you know, I don't think I like this job. My son asked me what I do for a living. And I have to tell him that I'm working for a criminal. So he made a decision, Fast Eddie. Fast Eddie said, I'm going to go ahead and offer testimony against Al Capone. And in fact, he did. And Al Capone was put in prison. Of course, not much later, Fast Eddie lost his life, was shot down in the streets of Chicago. Fast forward 10 years. It's a young man flying off the carrier, flying off the deck of an aircraft carrier. And he takes off in formation, and he's out there to support a bomber mission out in the Pacific. And he has a fuel leak. And he tells his squadron command, hey boss, leaking gas, I need to do something. He says, roger that. He says, you head back to the ship. And on his way back to the ship, he comes across about 10 Japanese fighters. And he shoots down several, and then without any guns, he does some aerial things that are just incredible. And he knew that if he didn't stop these Japanese fighters, that the carrier group that he now was abandoned without any air cover was going to be lost. Tens of thousands of lives. And this guy saved them. He made this decision by himself, alone, against us. Today, there's an airport named after this guy. His name is Butch O'Hare. And Butch O'Hare saved these lives. I wonder if he would have done the honorable thing that he did do in winning the Congressional Medal of Honor that day, if he didn't have a father like Fast Eddie to set an example for him. To show that that kind of honorable decisions that his father made affected his son 10 years later. I told my guys that story, and I said, listen, you don't know the impact of what you're going to do for the next couple of months. You don't know what situations you're really going to face. But be aware of the fact that maybe your sons will look to what you did in the war, and they'll want to know that you did the honorable things. And who knows, your sons may someday save tens of thousands of lives. It's a story, but it's important to visualize and help your unit, your sailors, your soldiers to visualize what you're talking about, because you can't just say honor. You can't just say ethics. You have to give them examples, and you need to talk to them all the time. Never let a day go by where you can't sit down and talk to your sailors and Marines about this stuff, because this is ultimately what success is going to rest on. I was a member of 1st Marine Division, and my commanding general wrote a letter to everybody, every single Marine, all 27,000 of us, and he handed them out. And then he personally went and spoke to every unit. In fact, if you were the commander of the unit and one person was missing, you were in trouble. But he talks about going back to the brawl and the tough fight that's going to happen. But the one thing that he highlights here is this concept of first do no harm. In your mind, when you do something on the streets in Iraq, the first thing that should come across is that you're not going to do any harm. If somebody is shooting at you and in the middle of that street is several women and several children, then your job is not to engage. You find another time to take care of the problem. Because through the discussions we realized that if in fact somebody did get hurt, you're just creating more insurgents and you're just prolonging the war. But he talked to every single person about that. It's interesting, first do no harm is like the first line in the Hippocratic Oath for doctors. We are professionals. We are professionals in the profession of arms. And as was discussed earlier on, You know, as professionals, we have a certain expertise in our warfighting abilities, but more importantly, what defines you as a professional is that code. It's how you execute those expert talents that you have. And a doctor, before he cuts off a leg, he's going to make sure that he does everything possible to save it. That's the same thing I think that we as members of the profession of arms need to keep in mind. I just want to now turn to the complexity issue. I'm stealing the words. I was told that I could, if I didn't do this quote thing, I could make a copyright problem. But Ralph Peters wrote this article, and you know, the fact is that we as professionals in the military, we talk about a revolution in military affairs, which is really all about technology. What's happening to us today is there's a counter-revolution going on. And it's a counter-revolution in military affairs because what's happening is the asymmetrical threats are saying you can have all the technology in the world. Ralph Peters talks about suicide bombers willing to discard civilization's cherished rules for warfare. It gives him enormous strength. He says, yet within his spiritual universe, he's more heroic than an American soldier who throws himself atop a grenade to spare his comrade. We are not prepared to handle that. That is not in our code of ethics as Westerners, as people who've grown up in the United States of America. We don't identify with those kinds of folks. Yet the reality is that if you look at how they do business and you realize that they are considered, some of these folks are considered more of a hero than one of our Marines or sailors that drops on the grenade. How do you compete against that? It's very, very difficult. Just a few examples. You know, when we first crossed the line into Iraq, and we had this letter and we knew about first do no harm, my situation was a little strange, but when I took over the regiment, they were already in the middle of combat. And I took them over about 2 days before I arrived into the city of Baghdad. And I crossed the river, which was a very interesting thing. You know, these guys in the Amtraks, they had driven them 800 miles on land, and they really weren't sure if they were water safe, but I said, put them in anyway. And we crossed the Diyala River and went into Baghdad. We got in a little firefight in this little city on the northeast side, it's called Sadr City, some of you may know about it. 2.6 million people in the city, and I had a total of about 5,000 Marines and sailors. We weren't there more than about an hour, and one of my Marines was killed. 1st Battalion, 4th Marines. Tom Weber was the chaplain there. And then another Marine about 10 minutes later got shot. And we had to pull him out. By this point, I am very frustrated. My staff had thrown me out, and I was up front with the battalion. And I was getting very frustrated because we couldn't really identify where the fire was coming from. And then somebody told me, sir, it's coming from this building. And I decided that I was going to go ahead and conduct an artillery strike on this building. Now, I'm the commander out there. I'm supposed to know better. I'm supposed to have read this letter about first do no harm. And the reason why I bring this up is because leadership can come from below. The battalion commander grabbed me and he said, sir, before you fire that artillery mission, I think maybe we can clear these buildings, room by room. And I said, you know, are you sure? And he said, yes, we can do it. And his guys cleaned the building, and when they went inside, lo and behold, the building that I was going to conduct an artillery strike against was loaded with women and children. And to include the dirtbags who were doing the firing. I'm grateful to that battalion commander because He saved me from doing something that would have created more problems than we were really prepared to deal with. But you know, you have a lot of emotion because as a commander, you have this irony, this dialectic that goes on that says, in 1 minute you love your folks and you don't want to put them in harm's way, but the second you say, if you don't engage, they could get hurt anyway. And when they do get hurt, you really have to step back and consider all the facts. I think also of later on in other mistakes that I've made. And this is really what I'm telling you. I'm telling you mistakes that I made. When my guys on OAF 2, I was given the order to go into Fallujah and take the city. It was a very dramatic period. You know, it was really urban environment, urban combat, test the mettle of a lot of people. At the same time, inside our forward operating base, which is a couple of miles outside, we were getting rocketed and mortared constantly. People were getting injured. One of the things that we tried to do is to use our radar to be able to identify where those rockets were coming from. And we did all kinds of innovative things by using fixed-wing aircraft and putting them overhead, either to show the bad guys that we're looking at you, or to be ready to respond once our radar got a 10-digit grid coordinate for where the rockets were coming from. And sometimes we picked up some really good, accurate grids. And then we had a system inside my COC. While the fighting is going on in the city, we had a system inside the COC, Combat Operations Center, where we would take the 10-digit grid, automatically send it up to the aircraft, automatically send it to the artillery, and within 2 minutes we were ready to fire back. My guys were getting very frustrated because people were getting hurt and they wanted to do something. And I felt it. I felt the energy that I needed to respond back in kind. We would look at our computer, it would show exactly what the ground looked like with 1 meter imagery, what it looked like in that spot, and if we were outside of a built-up area, then normally I would allow the artillery to fire. But most of the time, the insurgents knew exactly where to fire the rockets from, and they were firing right from buildings, from churches, from schools, and I never could return fire. Very, very frustrating. But in the height of one of these incidents, or one of these periods, where the frustration was high, I went ahead and I approved an artillery mission. Returned fire. The imagery said we were within 200 meters of a building, and we launched. Because at that time, I felt like the Marines needed to hear outgoing, because they were getting really frustrated. And I made a mistake, because after every mission, I sent team after there to go find out exactly what the effects of the fires were. And they weren't very good. This can happen to anybody. You can allow the craziness of the moment to do things like that. And as I look back on it, I wish that I had another battalion commander to tell me, hey, sir, don't fire that. The last example I'll give you is one that I think shows that at the lieutenant level, some of these guys go through some very tough times. There was a lieutenant who was in my regiment I put him up for a court-martial for killing 2 Iraqi insurgents. 30 rounds, right into the back of their heads. I found out about it because one of his sailors, one of his corpsmen, couldn't take it anymore and he had to tell somebody. We put this young man up for a court-martial. The day before this incident occurred, one of his Marines was killed by a roadside bomb. And if you have to know the strategy, when a bomb goes off, the guys are cued to looking out over the horizon to see whether or not we can find the trigger man. You're looking, and then there's automatic, immediate action drills to go out and block off the area. Well, they felt that they had identified the car the day before, but they couldn't track him down. The very next day, same thing, same place, IED, the guys saw this vehicle taken off, and they were convinced that these were the guys that killed Lance Corporal Savage the day before. They went after him with a vengeance. They caught the car, found no proof inside the car, but still made, the lieutenant pushed his guys away, and the lieutenant took action on his own. Put him up for court-martial. And he was freed. He was exonerated. Some of you may know the case, Lieutenant Pantano in New York. Here's what I part with. I think that the American public, when they look at our soldiers and our sailors and Marines that are serving, sometimes they step back and they go, you know, I respect those guys and what they do. Maybe I don't know how they can not appreciate the policies, but respect what the guys do. We're in a period where a lot of people don't serve in uniform anymore. It's a volunteer force. And maybe there's a sort of a guilt that says, you know, these guys are put in bad situations, and sometimes they're going to do bad things, and so we're going to have to give them a break. And my answer is never. Never. Even if the American public allows us to cheat on our decisions, we as leaders must never allow that to happen. Because it's just a slippery slope, and it's going to make the difficult situations of dealing with angry young men harder and harder. So, unfortunately, I leave you with the challenge that it's not going to get any easier, and you future officers are going to have a very tough job. But as long as you keep thinking the way I think you're thinking and what I've read, I think you're going to do just fine. Thank you very much.
Listening to our speaker tonight and invoking the quotation rule that he used, I was reminded of something, and I'll paraphrase it, that a previous superintendent, Vice Admiral Ryan, said when he named then Colonel John Allen as Commandant of Midshipmen. And I'll paraphrase it and say, I hope that all of the future officers in the room appreciate how much you can learn about being a combat leader of character by seeing and listening to Colonel John Toolan.